Have you ever stood in a place where a single fence separates two completely different worlds? I'm talking about Nogales. If you're standing right on the border between the US and Mexico, looking north, you see Nogales, Arizona. People there are relatively well off. They live long lives and their kids graduate high school. Property rights are secure. If you invest in a business, you know the government won't just seize it. But if you turn 180 degrees and you look south, you're in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. Even though it's a relatively wealthy part of Mexico, people there are significantly poorer. Starting a business is a massive risk because of organized crime, and corruption makes it nearly impossible to remove bad politicians. Here's what's surprising. They have the same climate, the same geography, similar ancestors, and they even listen to the same music and eat the same food. So why is one side thriving while the other struggles? This is the ultimate why of history. Today, the richest 20% of countries are 30 times wealthier than the poorest 20%. And despite all our technology and global aid, that gap isn't really closing. To understand why, we have to look at the rules of the game, what economists call institutions. For a long time, people thought geography was destiny. They figured tropical countries were just doomed to be poor because of the heat or diseases. But the 2024 Nobel Prize winners proved that theory wrong by pointing out a massive reversal of fortune. If geography were the only factor, the places that were rich 500 years ago should be still rich today, but they aren't. The parts of the colonized world that were the most prosperous and densely populated in 1500, like the Aztec and Inca empires, are now among the poorest. Meanwhile, the empty, poorer places like the North America and Australia became the wealthiest. It all comes down to what kind of system the colonizers set up. In densely populated areas, they established extractive institutions, which are systems designed to exploit the locals and suck out resources for a tiny elite. But in sparsely populated areas, especially where European settlers faced high mortality rates from disease, they couldn't just exploit the locals. They had to settle and build inclusive institutions that protected their own property rights and encouraged work. Those rules, written centuries ago, are still running the world's economies today. But it's not just about the past. If you want to know why a country grows now, you have to look at trade. Adam Smith, the father of economics, obsessed over the division of labor. Think about it. In a primitive society, you make your own clothes, grow your own food, and build your own house. You're a jack of all trades, but a master of none. But in a wealthy nation, we specialize. One person codes, another farms, another trades. This leads to massive efficiency gains. Data shows a strong positive correlation between exports and GDP growth. As a country opens up to global market, its wealth almost always follows. However, trade only works if your institutions aren't broken. If a country is riddled with corruption, where bureaucrats take bribes and taxpayers evade their dues, that lost revenue could have been spent on building schools or roads. Education is a massive force multiplier here. In Africa, research shows that increasing the level of higher education can raise long-run GDP per capita by about 12%. It makes people more creative, more productive, and better at using new technology. Now, this is where it gets really interesting and where traditional theories often fail. If good institutions like democracy and property rights are the only way to get rich, how do we explain the China puzzle? China has achieved the most incredible economic transformation in history over the last 4 decades. Yet it doesn't have Western-style democracy or strong property rights. This led researcher Quan Hong Tan to develop a new framework called Dynamic Institutional Adaptation Theory, DIAT. Tan argues that the secret isn't just having good rules, it's adaptive capacity. This is the ability of a country's institutions to actually respond to pressure and change when things get messy. He breaks this down into 4 pillars, or the Adaptive Capacity Index, ACI. The first pillar is information processing capacity. Can the government actually collect and use data to make decisions? During COVID-19, countries that could track the virus and analyze data effectively, which are high ACI countries, suffered far less economic damage than those that were flying blind. The second is coordination mechanisms. Can the government, the private sector, and different agencies actually work together? Look at Botswana. It's an African success story because, unlike many neighbors, it didn't fall into the resource curse. When they found diamonds, instead of the elite fighting over the loot, they coordinated. They built the Pula Fund to save that money for the future and invested it in their people. They avoided the Dutch disease, where a resource boom destroys the rest of the economy. The third pillar is learning and innovation. This is the capacity to experiment. China is the master of this. They didn't adopt a perfect system overnight. They used a strategy called crossing the river by feeling the stones, testing out special economic zones to see what worked before scaling it up. They learned from the world but adapted it to their own context. The fourth pillar is legitimacy and social cohesion. Do the people trust the system enough to support difficult changes? If the public believes the system is rigged, which is an extractive institution, they won't cooperate. But if there is high social trust, the government can mobilize the entire country for long-term goals. Compare that to a country like Argentina. A century ago, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world, but they suffered from low adaptive capacity. They had constant policy reversals, conflict between national and local governments, and they kept making the same economic mistakes without learning from them. They were trapped by their own inability to adapt. So what's the real takeaway for a nation trying to break the cycle of poverty? Most traditional advice tells them to just copy the West. Copy our laws, copy our elections, but DIAT says that's a mistake. You can't just transplant a complex institution into a different culture and expect it to work. Instead, countries need to focus on building their internal capacity to adapt. They need better data, better coordination, and a culture of experimentation. The fence of fate in Nogales isn't just about the physical barrier. It's a symbol of 2 different institutional paths. One side is part of a system that allows for innovation, trade, and adaptation. The other is still struggling with the legacy of extraction and corruption. But as research shows, change is possible. When the revolutionary threat of the masses become too great, or when leaders realize that inclusive systems create more wealth for everyone in the long run, the commitment problem can be broken. Prosperity isn't a gift of geography or a result of luck. It's a result of building a system that can learn, trade, and protect the efforts of its people. The wealth gap is 30 times today, but by focusing on adaptive capacity, the next century of economic history might look very different. See you in the next video.